Hey everyone, this is Adam Ellenboss from Nightlight Astrology. Happy Friday, everybody. Today we're going to take a look at a very peculiar set of transits, not common at all, happening between Mercury and Mars. Now, these two planets will get together in a variety of different aspects. That's not uncommon, but seeing them get together in a series of aspects is. And the reason for that, we're going to take a look at today. And then we're going to give you some things to watch for. So the two planets are making a sextile right now, just to be clear. Mercury having recently turned direct in Leo, making a sextile to Mars in Libra. But it's actually the first of two. They're going to make two back to back sextiles. That doesn't happen all that often. So we're going to talk about that today. And then I'm going to give you a list of things to watch for given those four major areas of life. We'll talk about a 5 things to watch for list within the realm of psychology, relationships, work, and home and family, which kind of covers the bases and gives us a richer tapestry of images to work with, I hope. I've been enjoying this format recently, so I hope you will as well. Anyway, that's our agenda for today. Before we get into it, as always, remember to like and subscribe. It helps our channel grow immensely when you drop a comment, give us the thumbs up every day. If you watch regularly and you're not yet subscribed, please consider subscribing. It helps us grow as a business. It supports us, helps the algorithm find us, all of that good stuff. So, as always, you can find transcripts of any of these daily talks on the website, which is nightlightastrology.com. We have a goal to see if we can get to 100,000 subscribers on the channel by next summer. So, we're working toward that goal, and every subscription helps. Really, thank you, everyone. Go over to the website, and if you missed it last night, there was a live talk on the seventh house. You can still pick up the recording, go to live talks, and you'll see the seventh house right there. That talk can be purchased as a recording after the live version is out. And if you missed it and you already purchased it, of course, you'll get the recording as well. So check that out. In September, next webinar will be on looking at Mercury and all of the planetary combinations with Mercury. What does Mercury look like when it's with Neptune, Pluto, Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter? We're going to go through all of the Mercury pairings. We're going to do that for Venus again in the fall. Really excited for that kind of new take on the webinar series, something new we'll be adding in as we go along. The other thing, of course, is if you go to the events page, click on Immersive Retreat. Our brand new training program in retreat style will be taking place in June of 2026. It's called The Oracle Within, a training in the theory and practice of divinatory astrology. At the end of today's video, there is an additional informational video tagged on at the end to tell you all about the retreat, who it's for, what it includes, how to sign up. It went on sale this week. Spaces are limited. We're already filling up. So please check out the video at the end if you want to come study with us in a brand new program that complements all the other programs at Nightlight, and is also going to be really nice for us to actually spend time in person studying together. It's great to study online. It's a great technology we have available to study wherever you are in the world, but there's nothing like studying actually in person with a group of fellow students. So anyway, stick around at the end today to hear more about that. I hope to see some of you in Mexico next year. Alrighty, let's take a look at the real-time clock and get into these very interesting, very peculiar Mercury-Mars connections. So here is Mercury today, Friday, August 15th, making a little sextile to Mars in the sign of Libra. Now, I'm going to take this forward to Monday, and what I want you to notice is that they come together again on Monday. So if we go forward just a touch, we'll see that, actually, let me get this down to the minute. So the two planets are coming together. Here it is. Oh, we're close. Oh my gosh, we're going to get it. Here we go. So here's the two planets. This is about 1 in the morning Central Time, Monday, August 18th. There's 5 minutes of the sextile recurs. Now let's bring this back to today, Friday, just so we can show you the difference. Today, and you know what? I'm actually going to eliminate everything from our view except for Mercury and Mars. Just gets a little easier on the eyes. At least for me it does. So let's take them all out. Okay, so here we are on Friday, and you can see that their connection is coming through as the day goes on. right up to speed. Oh, here they are. Okay, sorry. I just paused it because it was taking too long. So let's take a look at this again. So here we have, this is actually Thursday night late. So it kind of comes through early morning, depending on where you're located. You can see Mercury and Mars connecting at 5 degrees and 5 minutes of Leo and Libra. And then if we just sort of gradually take this forward hour by hour, we notice that they're traveling very close together within just minutes of perfection all throughout the day today on Friday. And then again, they meet on Monday early in the morning. So that doesn't happen all the time. That's the point. And I apologize for the clunkiness of my display today. But that connection between the two planets is not, because Mercury moves so quickly, typically it will be the planet applying to whatever aspect it's making with Mars, and it makes that aspect, and then it keeps going, and it's unless it's changing speeds or directions, it's not likely to make a second aspect in close succession. So because Mercury's speed is picking up right now after a retrograde, we have this rare instance where the two planets connect in close succession. When that happens, we can pay attention as symbolic thinkers to what that might mean. So, for example, when something happens and then it happens again, and there's a parallel between two events that happen in close succession, you will often see that happening around the time that two planets are dancing closely together, that the parallel movements of the planets close together in an aspect that occurs twice in close succession will mirror an event that has two parts to it. So one thing you could watch for between now and Monday would be an event or a theme or a topic that has a kind of mirroring or echo effect, or where there's a part one and a part two. Another way of thinking about it that is, I guess, less literal would be to say that there is something that's ongoing, that's peaking and then gaining just a bit of distance and then peaking again, almost like two parts to the same event, rather than being two distinct events. Maybe it's just one event that has a little bit of a wave pattern going on, where it's like the drama rises and then comes down a little bit and then rises again. So you can watch for those kinds of developments, and that makes, when the planets are doing something like that, it's as though there's two people and they're having a conversation, and they take a bathroom break and they come back and they sit down and they keep sipping their coffee, and the conversation continues. Whatever ways that we have of thinking about it, we're imagining two things getting together, briefly parting, and then coming back together again, and any way in which that may mirror our experiences over the next couple of days. So and because that doesn't happen all that often with these two planets, there may be something a little bit special or rare or unique about the symbolism of what's unfolding this weekend. Uh, there's, when something astronomically is rather rare, one of the ways that that will translate into our experiences is that something a little bit exceptional is happening, something that doesn't have the same familiar showing in our experience. This is why, for example, when we have transits of planets to our birth charts, those transits aren't happening all of the time. And when they're happening, there's something very unique about our experiences. You get an activation from a Mars transit to a planet in your chart, and it's not the run of the mill everyday experience. Something different is happening. So that's something exceptional. All astrological transits are, in a way, exceptional insofar as they never happen twice. Like, there's never, this entire solar system is never in the exact same place twice before the sun burns out, right? So everything is unique. But in terms of those patterns and aspects that are, you can kind of set your watch to, they happen every year. That there's dynamics in the sky that we're all very familiar with. We all know what it feels like, when Venus and Saturn, Venus and Pluto get together. Okay, here we're in another path. I recognize this. So when we talk about something that's rare astrologically, what we mean is that we don't necessarily recognize the pattern. We don't go, oh yeah, this is a familiar archetypal recurrence. Even if the material is always new, there's something about the underlying template that's not. And that's the kind of thing we have to think about with this aspect, which is what makes it so interesting. This doesn't happen very often at all, that the two planets get together, briefly part, and then get back together at the typical speeds that they're moving. So something a little exceptional going on, and I think that's why I'm spending time laboring this, just to get us to think a little differently about the connection of these two planets as they're appearing. All right, anyway, I think I've said enough about that to at least get us into the mindset of tracking this a little differently than we might otherwise. Like, what part one and part two, today through Monday, what's happening, or what's rising up into our awareness, and what is sort of unique or exceptional about the space of this weekend. New thoughts, new ideas, sparking new conversations, new debates, new dialogues, or things that we're confronting mentally, intellectually, conversationally, that we might not otherwise, or a part one and a part two of a conversation that maybe has been waiting to happen for a long time, and it's sort of rare that we're able to address something as directly and maybe constructively as we're finding ourselves able to do right now. These are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about. Now, all of that, I want to talk about Mercury and Mars meeting in this context through the lens of their sextile, and then through the lens of four different areas of life, and give you five things to watch for within those four different areas. I've been doing this a lot lately. So, internal psychological dynamics, what am I feeling? How is this affecting me personally? What's the interior dialogue like? What am I experiencing on a personal or psychological level? Love and relationships. How does this manifest potentially in the realm of love and relationships? How about career or work? And then family dynamics. These cover the four angular house topics, which for most of us represent the areas of life that we're generally seeing or experiencing transits uh, within, right? So regardless of where they're actually at in your chart, these are the areas of life that we typically experience transits through. So this has been a kind of a fun way of doing things. Okay, so on that note, let me bring up my list. Let's start with internal and psychological dynamics. Let me get my notes up here. I also do have for you, um, I've got five movies at the end that might be interesting for Mercury Mars contacts. Now, before I get into these, let me just say that a sextile between Mercury and Mars, sextiles being of the nature of Venus, tends to connect these two planets in ways that are more harmonious and constructive. So we're thinking about something like the rational intellect, communication, technology, um, and something like will, force, aggression, action, executive thinking, courage, assertiveness with Mars. When the two things come together harmoniously, it's a pretty nice pairing right now, honestly. So I would say we're more likely to see positive traits from this combination over the weekend that could be very constructive. The pairing of them might make for something a little surprising or a little off the beaten path, like not something we totally saw coming, a synchronicity kind of vibe behind this. Uh, but I will mention a few dark potentials to tag on with every section that we visit now as well. All right, so on the internal psychological level, I would watch for bursts of clear, executive, decisive thinking, and the ability to make courageous, bold decisions um, based on clear thinking or ideas that you feel you have to act on. So that's number one. Number two would be a way of being, especially with Mars in Libra, a way to communicate something that's incisive, sharp, strong, convicted, but is still harmonious. And being able to maybe just articulating things within yourself or clarifying ideas, thoughts, feelings within yourself, and also finding the right strategic way of communicating those things. Number three to me would be problem solving, research, or energy for mentally demanding tasks. Just put those two things together constructively. Inside, I might be solving problems, investigating something, or being able to act under pressure mentally. Number four would be mental playfulness, where there's just wit, charm, grace, banter, playfulness, argumentation, and debate, but maybe with a softer, more elegant, or refined social awareness. And then number five would be confidence, mental, intellectual, communicative confidence. So all kind of turnings of the jewel. Now, the dark side of this that could be applied really to any of the things I just said would be where impatience, restlessness, or impulsivity leads the way in terms of mental or intellectual energies, where you're maybe just there's a level of impulsivity um, and um, impatience that gets the best of you. Even if there is a good idea, you may want to sit with it and let it cook a bit, especially given the back to back aspects happening. Part one, Friday, you find yourself saying something, acting on something impulsively. You feel that you have to refine it or take something back. It's hard to put the toothpaste back into the tube. So be careful of that since there's two parts of this, especially. And then maybe an emphasis on winning or dominating mentally, verbally, intellectually. Those would be shadows of the personal psychological side of this. So let's move to love and relationships, kind of flip into the seventh house realm. And I wonder about the most exciting part of this to me, because of the sextile of the nature of Venus, would be sort of flirtatious banter, playful, witty. Like I'm in love with you because you're interesting, you're thoughtful, you're smart, you're fun, you're playful. I like the banter. So like playful, witty, uh, you know, getting getting turned on by each other's conversations or thoughts. I would also say the the kinds of debate or argumentation that are good and healthy and not so edgy that they can't be constructive. Um, I would being able to address things with both grace and um, confront things with grace and like directness. Um, I would think about partners being able to plan or coordinate things with a sense of balance and fairness. And I would also um, think about all of the opposite qualities of passive aggression, like directness and the courage and respect to be direct and forthcoming. So those are sort of five things bleeding into one another a little bit. But the shadow to me in relationships would be criticism, domination of mind, like I have to win, I have to be smarter than you, um, not listening and needing to be right, uh, and maybe impulsive, mental, communicative qualities in relationships, sharp tongue, that kind of thing. All right, let's go to career or work. For me, if you're a business owner, you have a job, whatever it is you do, you work for a company. I love the idea of this being about new ideas, brainstorming, coming up with new approaches, innovation. So those just kind of brain fires that could be really exciting. I would think about tact, diplomacy, and directness, being able to negotiate things, being able to negotiate things because of tact and directness, like well balanced. I would think about being able to adapt quickly or on the move and having rapid ability to solve problems in job or workspace. I would think about clear delineations of power and responsibility, clear articulations of those things. And that can be really helpful because if there's confusion about roles, boundaries, duties, the pecking order of things with a group of people all working on something, this could be very clarifying with that kind of any kind of confusion around something like that. I would also think about persuasiveness and being able to be charming, direct, aware of what sells, what works, what doesn't, aware of an audience. So clear plans, strategies, negotiations, sales tactics or techniques. I like it for that reason. Now, on the shadow side, I would think of, again, the need to dominate or win becoming problematic in the workplace, where competition and dominance mentally, intellectually, technologically could create ego struggles, power struggles, saying things and getting, foot and mouth syndrome. I said something I regret. And maybe excitement leading to overlooking details. Okay. Last but not least, family dynamics or inner life, private sphere of life, inner family, home, living environment. Um, I would think about if there needs to be a diplomatic conversation between family members or people living together. This could be very helpful in addressing things that are complicated, that need a little tact and care, sensitivity, but directness. Very good for that, addressing things. Um, if you are moving, relocating, rearranging, purging, organizing, designing, very helpful energy for smoothly enacting plans, visions, and anything to do with the plans or visions associated with the organization or structure of a home environment. I would also think about the potential for, in parenting, for example, to have teachable moments, let's call them. For a parent, the moment may be a teachable moment. For the child, as a parent, you may have a good opportunity to be that teacher. A lot of the time, it's through actions, not words, I think, but this might be one where words are effective. Uh, you could think of this as within a family constellation, it's a complex ecosystem of needs. How do I make my needs clear without becoming demanding? That balance, that grace, that diplomacy, that tact and directness, the courage to say, this is what I need. That's a very positive potential for this around home and family sphere of life. I would say one of the trickiest things about having a family for me is the coordination of events, schedules, needs, etc. So a very good energy for being thoughtful, careful, fast, strong decision making to balance and organize the complex ecosystem of a home and family. Now, the shadow potential here to me would be verbal combativeness and people who are louder or more dominant than others within the home or family. The feelings that are strong but private and therefore potentially problematic because we don't know how to bring them out or express them. And maybe this tendency to, I think, for example, of the classic relationship dynamic where I want to be listened to, I don't want my problem solved. This is a problem solving transit, but if you need to be listened to or have space held for you, you may not like it that this astrological configuration mirrors someone who is all about trying to solve your problem rather than just listen. That might be a shadow as well. All right. Well, those are 5 things to watch for in those 4 major areas of life, given mostly constructive connection between Mercury and Mars, the rational and executive, the will and the mind. Now, there are 5 movies that I did some research to find that I think nicely pair this energy together. When I was in an ethics class in college studying philosophy, I had to watch the movie 12 Angry Men. If you've never seen it, it's old school and it's all about argumentation and debate, trying to get down to the truth of a situation. And prejudice and bias and all sorts of things that can get in the way of being clear in our thinking, rational and fair in our thinking. It's a classic jury conversation. Mirrors the kind of internal dialogue and search for kind of equilibrium, balance, fairness, rational care for the situation, that happens internally, right? So if you've ever seen 12 Angry Men, it's a very good Mercury Mars kind of movie to watch over the weekend. Another one that I really like that mirrors Mercury Mars very well is Spotlight. It's a movie about journalism. I think it won an Oscar. I went and saw it at the theater when it came out. I was living in New York City, I believe, at the time. All about the search for truth and the care of Mercury and Mars for research and precision and accuracy and getting down to the objective truth. So when you think about investigative journalism, you really think about Mercury Mars. When you think about Mercury Mars, you think about the ability to be persuasive regardless of right and wrong. And especially with Mars and Libra, being charming, witty, smart, winning, but not necessarily being ethical, that could be something to look at. There's this movie that I showed uh, to my students when I was teaching composition as a graduate assistant called Thank You for Smoking. And the reason I had students watch it because it was about argumentation and persuasiveness in speech and hence in our writing, and how to be aware of the line between um, being wise, smart, witty, charming, persuasive, but also potentially uh, where's the line morally or ethically. And this is something to consider when you're learning how to be persuasive in your writing and speech as a young writer. So I use that movie. It's great Mercury Mars combination. If you've never seen Thank You for Smoking. Oppenheimer, I watched recently. And I think when it comes to research and questions about what constitutes a good idea and where is a good idea maybe not a morally good idea, there's ideas that have a lot of utility and usefulness, or that could get us ahead or get us something we want, but then the question about, is this actually good for humanity? Or so Oppenheimer raises a lot of questions about discovery, ideas, research, technology, inventiveness, and questions about the ethical boundaries around those things. Obviously, we're talking about Oppenheimer here, but that was a good movie. I thought it was very interesting to learn about the history of some of the some of all of that story in human history. Finally, The Imitation Game, which is another movie that has a lot to do with the mind and code cracking and stuff like that. I'm trying to remember who is in the image. What was his name? Benedict Cumberbatch? Is that? Let me just look it up. It was 2014. It was Benedict. Oh, come on. What was it? What's his name? Oh, was it Benedict Cumberbatch? I knew. I was like, I'm pretty sure that's his name. Um, but anyway, this is it's a movie about decryption, if I remember correctly. With the was it the Enigma or the decoding that happened in, I believe it was World War II. I saw this movie a long time ago in the theater when I was living in D.C. with Ashley. We went and saw it. But the reason that this came to my mind is because it's a good one when it comes to fast problem solving, decoding, decrypting, uh, Hermes Mars, right? The pressure to get something right. Interesting. So anyway, those are all movies you could watch if you wanted a little dose of Mercury Mars energy. There's lots of others that came to my mind, but I actually have like 6 others on the list right here. But those are the ones that I felt like um, I just narrow it down to 5. So, because I have to have my list of 5. Anyway, I hope you're having a great week. I hope this gives you some useful things to think. Remember, interesting today and Monday. We've got like bookends. This doesn't happen all that often. So, what ends up being a little eccentric or unique about the connections between these archetypes over the weekend? I can't wait to hear your stories. So, come back if something happens and drop us a comment. If you got a good story to share anytime, use the hashtag grab, tell us the transit, tell us your story, or email us your story in the transit, grab@nightlightastrology.com. We try to do a storytelling episode later this month, I hope. Catch up with some of the transits that you all have been sharing. So anyway, that's it. Hope you're having a good one. Stick around after I sign off to learn more about the retreat in Mexico next June. Bye. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking around. I'm really excited to tell you more about the Oracle Within, the retreat that we'll be hosting in Mexico in June of 2026. So this is a little informational video that I've made to answer all the questions that you might have about the retreat. In this video, I'm going to start by telling you more about what you will learn on the retreat, what the focus of our studies will be, and then I'm going to tell you about our daily format and sort of what day-to-day life will look like at this retreat center outside of the actual material we'll be studying. I'm going to then tell you who this retreat is ideal for, what kind of background you may want to have before coming along. And then finally, I'm going to tell you more about how you can register. And of course, I'll take you over to the actual retreat website page so that you know where all of the information is located. There's also a really rich FAQ section that will probably answer any further questions you may have. On that note, let's start with what will I learn? So, for a very long time, astrologers have talked about what astrology is. What is this? Is it some kind of karmic science? Is it a science of causal energies and influences? Is this actually scientific? Like, what order of knowing is astrology? If we say we can know something about reality, then how can we actually say that when it comes to astrology? These may seem like really deep, dense philosophical issues, but actually, they're at the heart of what it means to really deepen into astrology. To have an understanding of what this actually is so fundamental and so helpful. Throughout all of the programs that I teach at Nightlight, I, of course, talk at length about my belief that astrology is a form of divination, that this is a language of signs and omens, very much like the tarot or the I Ching or many other systems of symbolic divination from all around the planet. We're going to spend a lot of time on this retreat talking about what astrology is.
Hey, my name is Chris Brennan, and you're listening to the Astrology Podcast. Joining me today is astrologer Rod Chang, and we're going to be talking about comets in astrology and his new book on this topic that's titled Comets in Astrology. So, hey, Rod, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you as well. We were just talking about the last time that we met up in person, and it was at the AA conference in
Yeah,
2019 in the UK.
yeah.
Brilliant. All right. So I'm excited about this topic because I've actually been researching comets myself intensely for the past couple of years. And originally I was going to put together a separate episode on it, but it was getting kind of big. But I didn't know any other astrologers that were into comets. So I was very excited to see the announcement about the publication of your book recently through Wessex Astrologer. And the book is coming out this month. So I thought we could have a great conversation today to sort of give a big overview of comets and some of the things that we've both looked into when it comes to that topic. How did you first get into this topic?
Oh, well, I think probably have to go back to 2000, around 2013 when there was a comet called Pan-STARRS. And that was I think it was from the end of 2013, and then people start to discuss about this comet, and I was approached by a Taiwanese journalist, a reporter, asked me about, make some prediction or forecasting about the comet, and I was like, I have no idea. I have zero knowledge about the comet. I mean, being an astrologer, I like, talk about transit, outer planet, and sometimes about fixed stars, but I never studied comet before. And the only word I can squeeze it out was ancient people think that is a disaster. And I was feel shame about myself. And that was the point. I said, no, I have to go through it because I really want, I was really wondering why we never talk about comet. And I'm sure definitely have some, ancient astrologers work on it, and I never, as you know, I was working on a modern astrology, psychological astrology, rather than working with intensive like you with the traditional knowledge. And I say I have to at least go back to see how ancient astrology talk, and that was the starting point.
I love that. All right. So it's been this whole 12-year journey. And I like how you came to it because I think it's the same for many astrologers, which is even though comets are a very notable astronomical phenomenon, and we occasionally hear legends about them from ancient times as acting as omens and as problematic significators, there's very little discussion about comets in modern astrology in like the 20th and 21st century. And I think part of that is just they happen so infrequently that we don't regularly have to think about them that much, I think, right?
I agree, 100% agree with you. This is one point is like, because when we notice if there is a so-called great comet in the sky, and it would draw people's attention. But we know now on the media, especially with the social media, everything could be exaggerated. So usually media like to draw more attention from their follower or reader, so they would say apparently there would be a comet brighter than the moon or something, and people say, oh my god, where is that comet? And that is interesting because it always end like a disappointment, because comet appear in the sky are not like that, like what the 1996 Hale-Bopp. That was the huge phenomenon, that because that comet was huge. But most of the time, we don't even not notice that unless you get up early or sleep late or or pay a lot of attention chasing the comet. And that's one reason the great comet are not that often. Usually, probably like one every 7 years or 10 years. We cannot predict it. But there is another reason, I think. Um, I think most of us are not familiar. We are unlike the ancient astrologer. They have to, calculate ephemeris on themselves, and they are very familiar with calculating. For us, it's like we click on app, we click on computer, and we don't even working with ephemeris. So when comets there, and also, I mean, even with experienced astrologers, we have difficult to calculate the orbit of comet. We have to rely on, scientists and astronomers in NASA to formulate those, orbit calculation. And so that is another factor, I guess. Because we don't have ephemeris of comet, and that
Right.
really contribute like, well, we don't know where it is. We better not talking about it.
Yeah, that's a really great point that even most modern astrology software or websites don't even calculate comets. So it's not really even something that sort of goes to show how little astrologers have sort of studied them in contemporary times, just because I guess there's not a lot of people asking for them, or they're so infrequent. So, for example, even Halley's Comet only comes like once in a lifetime, like every 75 years or
Yeah.
so. So it's like that's so infrequent that it gives not a very regular opportunity to study it in terms of contemporary events. And as a result of that, astrologers only sometimes get interested in if a really big one shows up occasionally.
Yes, and also there is another challenge. Is not, I don't think it's the software designer's fault, because each comet have their own particular orbit, and they usually just show up out of blue, like suddenly they appeared. So I think the software developer have difficult to update it. They probably can update it once, everything is settled down, and then, so it's not a regular update for them. I think maybe that is another challenge. I did notice some, I don't know, some astrologer who was very familiar with astrology software. They do use, some astrology software, like Astrolog, that freeware, and to show comets orbit. And that was the first time we're like, wow, that is amazing. But that need a lot of dedication and a mathematic mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go back and let's start at square one. What is a comet, just in terms of its composition and things like that?
Well, I think comet, from astronomy view, comet was, from could be from three different places in our solar system. One would be Oort cloud, and also, around the outside of the edge of our solar systems. Both, I think, the comet from there usually is kind of we should say, the long periodic journey. They will come back, very maybe like a Halley's comet, and that would be like 70 years or 80 years, and that was a sum of comet that would just appear once, and so from that origin age of our solar system. But recently, from the astronomer, they also talking about those comet around what we say asteroid belt, the between the Mars and Jupiter. Those comet would be like periodic, short periodic comet, maybe come back every 4 or 5 years, and that is like three place that we can notice comet coming from, and the comet, well, from the that kind of age of our solar system, usually are composed by dust and ice. That's main composite, and then some chemical compound. When they coming to the approach the, I think their orbit, when their orbit pass around Jupiter and Mars, because they're hitting by the sun, and so the gas and ice start to evaporate, and we start to see the beautiful tail, the mark of a comet's tail, and this beautiful, beautiful tail.
Yeah, so I love that. So, and that's the name for a comet. Is comet in Greek meant like a hairy star from
Yeah.
the tail because it's composed of dust and ice and rock and other sometimes liquids and gases that are frozen out in space. But then when it comes to the inner part of the solar system by the sun, it starts heating up, and then you get this long, sometimes very beautiful tail that stretches
Mm.
for a very, very long period of time and can be very visually striking when it gets close enough to the sun and to Earth.
Yeah, yeah, and then we know that different comets have their own tail shape, and one of the way to interpret the comet in the ancient time is about their tail.
Right. Yeah. Most of the interpretations in ancient times were symbolic, having to do with things like the color, the visual
Mm.
appearance, like the shape of the tail, and other factors like that. Let's see. So before we get there, so you made a distinction between astronomers distinguish between short period comets, which are ones that take 200 years or less to do a
Mm-hmm.
full orbit and come back
Mm-hmm.
to being visible again near us, whereas long period comets are ones that take more than 200 years, and in some instances those can stretch out thousands and thousands of years, right?
Yeah, yeah. And some comet never come back.
Right. So they just come in for one quick swing, or there was one in the past year or two that was on like a 10,000 year time frame or like something crazy like that, I
Yes,
think, right?
last year. Yeah, last year was that comet is famous. My I think it's my first great comet. Its name is San Atlas, and it has a particular name. I have to go through it, and I'm not sure, but some astronomer believe it's called hydroponic. So it's like a comet would its trajectory will just like coming to the near the sun, and eventually will eject away from the solar system, and that would be like it could be several thousand years or 10,000 years, but some of them will never come back.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So you're talking about the one from last year that I think peaked in intensity in October. And that was one of the reasons I got interested in comets because of some of the comments and weird ominous things that were happening in the lead up to the US presidential election last year. And that was one
Wow.
of them that was, yeah, which was, so how do you pronounce that one? Because I've always struggled. It's,
Okay, yes. It is very interesting about the recent comet's name. Well, this one called San Atlas. The first name is Chinese, San, Purple Mountain. Purple Mountain. That is
nice.
dedicated to the observatory in China, in Nanjing, called San Purple Mountain. And Atlas is a organization belong to NASA, and then it's kind of an alert system for the asteroid, impact of asteroid. So you will hear a lot of uh, comet Atlas is dedicated to this name. And so San Atlas is the great comet of last year.
Got it. Yeah. So that is one we will not see again in our lifetime or anytime soon, right?
True, yeah, true, yeah.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing in and of itself is that comets are somewhat erratic compared to what we're used to with like planets or fixed stars or other things that are used in astrology because a comet kind of comes in out of nowhere sometimes and just appears. And what's interesting about that is even though we have tracked a lot of periodic comets, that we know to anticipate, like Halley's Comet, for example. There are some that are newly discovered that sometimes astronomers don't discover until they're like relatively close. So that still comes as somewhat of like a surprise when they're newly discovered and show up.
Yeah, well, let me give you an example. It was a very, very interesting one. I think it was the 2023. There is a comet called Comet Nishimura. And this comet was really come out of blue. It only been discovered maybe couple weeks before we can see it. And this type comet, because particular of this comet is we call it cruise sun grazer. So it moved very very close to the sun. So it's hiding behind the sunlight. We have difficult to see it. And it was just lucky, this Japanese astrophotographer, he just take a photo every morning about, around the sun and then trying to examine. And he found that one just couple weeks before it shows up. And that was really out of blue. So this is, even we can kind of forecast or calculate all the comets, like periodic comets orbit, but they can still surprise us. I think this would be like a take into the modern astrology's term. I would say surprising or out of blue could be one of a character of a comet.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And also because even the ones that are periodic that show up in less than 200 years, let's say, there's still an unexpected element to them in the sense that sometimes they'll get close to the sun and the sun will hit them in a certain way and the tail will be ignited and will become really beautiful and obvious and long. But other times, the astronomers don't know how long the tail is going to be or how visually spectacular it's going to be until it actually gets here. And sometimes they'll be anticipating that a comet will be big and really bright, and then it'll be a disappointment because it'll actually be very dim or the tail won't be very long that time, and it'll come and go without being that spectacular.
Yeah, the famous one is Halley's Comet last visit in 1986. And it was a big, huge disappointment for all the comet chaser, for all the amateur astronomer, because the things we know is coming back, and then everyone was prepared, all the telescope, and they're just waiting for the have a good weather and going to make a record of this comet. But that year, well, Halley Comet, this shows up, but with weather condition and with the angle, the tail wasn't beautiful enough. So people was, that get very upset about this 1986. Another one is you probably heard about it. Called Comet Cognos is 1973, and that was also because media exaggerated it would be the comet of century. Now we hear this word very often. Any tiny comet, they will call it comet of century, and then will end up disappointment because we never know how it's going to shows up.
Right. Yeah, I love that. So it's like it can go either way. And so there is this erratic, sort of unpredictable quality to them, which also kind of ties into the astrological interpretation. And I know a lot of times in ancient times, eclipses would sometimes be interpreted similar to eclipses, or sorry, comets would be interpreted similar to eclipses, in that there's something that's surprising, that's almost like breaking out of the natural cycles of things and doing something that's anomalous or that's like weird or um, uh, interruptive.
Agree with you. I think most people familiar with Ptolemy's book, and I think in his book he put comet with eclipse interpretation with eclipse color of eclipse and the comet, and there is true that comet does has the I think the a meaning of disruption, because as an astrologer, we calculate all the orbit of the movement of the planet, And we can even calculate eclipse when are going to happen and where going to happen. That's true. But the comet is one of them really going to kind of surprise everyone before, I think, before like Halley's really work out the orbit of a comet in the, in the around the 17th century and 18th century. And then I think it always come to surprise us, and then like eclipse, it usually give us a bad omen.
Yeah, there tended to be, like eclipses, comets tended to be interpreted as negative omens in ancient astrology. And for the most part, that's true. There are exceptions to that in some instances where they could be interpreted positively based on some conditions, both in the Western tradition as well as in the Indian tradition, where Varahamihira has like a long list of different types of comets. But for the most part, yeah, like eclipses, they seem to be interpreted oftentimes as coinciding with negative or difficult things. And that actually brings up an interesting point about something I realized is that in the Western tradition, there were debates about what comets were. And unfortunately, Aristotle believed that comets were just atmospheric phenomenon. And as a result of that, because of how influential he was as a philosopher, a lot of people in the West followed Aristotle's belief that they were just atmospheric phenomenon rather than actual like celestial bodies. But I feel like that actually set back research into comets in the West as a result of that false belief about what they were. But in the Chinese astrological tradition, they actually had a very long history of documenting comets and making very good records and also interpreting them astrologically. And they were frequently referred to as broom stars, right?
Yes, indeed. I think the earliest we can find a record was 613 BC in the record called Spring and Autumn. And that is kind of a very early historical record in China. And it was recorded on that year, 613 BC, I say the seventh month of lunar calendar. There is a broom star appear around the Big Dipper or cloud, we say. That was a record of, I think that was a Halley's Comet, and was around the, I think around the Big Dipper area, so Ursa Major, the area. So that was very interesting. I have to say, I've been so lucky to able to read all those historical record, and it does help me to went back to the Chinese historic book to dig out those comet history. And I haven't done enough, to be honest. I feel shame about myself because there's a whole lot, few thousand years record, and if I have to go to one by one, I mean that book, that this comic book would be maybe like a triple of or a bigger size. But it's very interesting to read those record that really, because we can calculate a date they appeared. So like you mentioned about the Aristotle's comet, and it was I think astronomer believe it was appear around like 371 BC. Recently, I think it was last month, there was still a paper discuss about its orbit and try to confirm the date, confirm the date and the comet. So that was so interesting through this kind of ancient record, and we can understand comet, how it has impact to us, and we can also, for me, like I enjoy doing the mountain astrology study, so I can go back to those years to see, is there any indication related to, the comet indicate about the maybe disaster or maybe some important political economic event.
Yeah, and I love you mentioned in your book that two of the earliest comets that were recorded in Chinese sources in 613 and 240 BCE have later been identified as actually recordings of Halley's Comet. So
Yeah.
sometimes astronomers can go back and actually identify and know what comet it was that was being observed at different times in history.
Yes, yes, and I think, yes, indeed, there even earlier record, but for I think there was earlier recorded in the Chinese documentary, but we are not sure is that real. The first things, and there is a speculation about is that we talk about is this Halley's comet, or we kind of just by calculating the it possible. It's possible a Halley's comet back to that time. That was a really long time ago, even before the 613 BC. So that is interesting. Even like we say for the Aristotle's one, we still have to, work on the orbit and to try to confirm, and we still say we are not sure.
Right. Yeah, I love that. So, right. So you said in the book that there may be a sighting in Chinese sources that goes back to almost like 1000 BCE, but it's not
Yeah,
clear if that was like a live sighting or if it was just calculated later after the fact.
I think so. Most likely is the afterward. Yeah.
Okay, got it. So, but as a result of there were debates. So not everybody in the West believed what Aristotle said, that was just atmospheric, and there were different astrologers that talked about or wrote about comets at different points in history in the Hellenistic and medieval and Renaissance traditions. But in terms of the astronomy, it's really during the Renaissance and the early modern period that astronomers started figuring out in the West that these comets were periodic. And Edmund Halley especially stands out as somebody who was a friend of Isaac Newton, who was
Hmm.
developing his theories of gravitation. And through that, he was able to predict that this comet was a recurring phenomenon and that he predicted when it would recur and which was later confirmed after his death like 18 years later, and that was sort of became the foundation of modern cometary theory at that point, and that was like a huge turning point in astronomy.
Definitely, I think when we talk about comet, we will always remember Halley's and his calculation in, I think, around the 1705. It is really, really important for us. And even also, I think there's one thing is also it kind of a proof Newton's law, Newton's the three law of the gravitation. And that was so interesting when but you're right, he didn't live long enough to see the Halley's comet come back. That is a big shame. But I think he does. He did this calculation is so important for the astronomer. But another one, I think, both for both astrology and astronomy. Another person we should mention is Tycho Brahe, and his dedication to comet, I think, is inspire a lot of the astronomer afterward. I think in the 1577, he started to record. He do observation and calculation about the comet in 1577. And also, I think in 1586, he really working on astrology. I love that when I find that book here. This book with I think with his record of the comet, where comet was about, and how he make prediction, interpretation of comet, and also working with like the lunar phase, new moon, full moon, and all these kind of things. I think in both astronomy way and also astrology way, he is the one, and this book is written in Latin, so it would be for a lot of astrologers should go have a look. It's very interesting. I couldn't read Latin, so I only can use the Google Translate to have a glimpse. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a fascinating character, Tycho Brahe, because he was so focused on improving astronomical methods and setting up an advanced observatory in order to make more precise observations and calculations. But one of the things that he did during that process was observe some comets and do some of the most detailed and advanced tracking of comets that had been done up to that point, aside from the Chinese astrologers and record keepers that had been watching them for centuries. So that became kind of an important turning point with Tycho Brahe and then Johannes Kepler. And it's interesting
Mhm.
that the two of them were not just astronomers, but they were also astrologers who were applying astrological significance and meaning to comets.
Yeah, yeah, and that is kind of I agree because they are both working as an astrologer. So they record, or for us, for working astrologers, it's more fun, to be honest. But I think Halley's definitely very important to calculate the periodic comet's orbit, and we start to think about, oh, so they are related rather than they just one off, because we know the Halley's comet has a destination number 1P, the periodic comet number one. So when we talk to astronomer, we give them the comet's name. They will say which one. But if we give them the destination number, they say, "Oh, you talk about that one." So there are some periodic comet. They will go with number 1P, 2P. Like the last year we have one is called 12P. Is also named the Devil's Comet. That is the number 12 of periodic comet. So I think, as you mentioned, Halley's calculation is so important for scientists, for astronomers, but I think it's also important for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So the 12P was Pons Brooks, and that was the one that appeared around like April time
Yeah,
frame, I think, right?
yes,
Okay, cool.
indeed. Yeah, and let me talk about this comment because it was so fun because there was a time I first time went to California. So that was the first time I went to California, and I tried to chasing this comet and with my tiny telescope. I finally saw it, and I just realized it has a name called Devil's Comet. That is another, I think, the characteristic of comet is that it's unpredictable, because as a periodic comet, it kept coming back, but it is very interesting. This time when this Pons Brook coming back, it bright up kind of a 100 Thailand before. So that would be because the nuclei, the compound, the nuclei inside of it has some was a kind of a quite active. So it brights up and also show the steep split tail like a devil's horn. So that's why we call it a devil's comet, or I think a Millennium Falcon, like in the Star Trek. Am I right? I'm not
Yeah,
really.
yeah. Star
Yeah,
Wars.
Star Wars. Sorry about that. Yeah, Star Wars.
There's a lot of angry nerds that might get very upset at this call.
Forgive me.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a good one that appeared last April. And so you chased it. So you went there to actually observe it to California. You traveled to
Yeah,
follow it. Some people do that with eclipses, but some people do chase comets as well.
yeah. I think kind of recently developed that because I chased solar eclipse too. So last year was eclipse in, we can see it in United States, from I think from Texas to even to New York, right, Buffalo.
Hmm.
So I was thinking, well, I have time, and the comet was appear in the sky, and we have eclipse, and I may be able to film it during the eclipse. So I really packed my gear and went to the California and traveled down to Texas to chase both of them. But unluckily, I see comet, I see solar eclipse, but I didn't have chance to see them both appear in the same sky.
Mm. Okay, yeah, yeah. I forgot that was the one that did coincide with the Great American Eclipse last year, and that was one of the things that first got me interested in researching comets, is I really wanted to know what that was about and what that meant. So that one is that was a 71-year comet, Pons
Yes.
Brooks, and one of the things that's important that I learned was that the shorter term comets that are less than 200 years, those tend to um, orbit along the ecliptic, along the same plane as like the sun and the planets. Whereas the longer form comets that are longer than 200 years, they tend to be off the ecliptic, and they can come in from like any direction, basically, right?
Well, honestly, I only learned this from you today. No, because I didn't really pay attention on it, but I hope that's true because that makes sense. That makes sense because I think the long periodic comet, I think they come really far, and they can really go anywhere. They can really go anywhere. But these kind of short period comet, they are really more binding. with our the movement of the solar system and the gravity of all the planet and the sun. So it does make sense.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. One of the realizations I had about, those great advancements that were starting to happen in discovering that comets were periodic and that you could calculate their orbits once Newton's theories of gravitation were developed. And all of this great activity is happening around the 17th century, where we're in the West truly finally starting to understand comets. And there's the option then, once they're known to be periodic, that we could study them more. But at the same time, astrology is in decline in the West. And I think that's actually then had this side effect where astrologers were not in a good position to truly develop a great cometary theory for astrology in contemporary times, just because the timing was kind of bad, basically, that we just finally started to understand what comets were and how to calculate them at a time when astrology was in decline, at least in Europe and in the West. So that's part of like what's being done more recently with research like the research that you're doing, and now that we have the option to study these things and track them more carefully, is that you can actually go back through history for the periodic ones and see like what happened around the time that different comets appeared at different times in history.
Yes, I agree with you. I think the lack of the tool, because we probably just like rely on other people calculate the ephemeris for us, and then we lack of knowledge of basically learning astronomy. And if we only focus on, I don't want to blame some sign colonists, but if we only talking about the 12th sign and the planet, and we ignore, I think some of us probably already ignore the sky, what happened in the sky. We only care about what's showing on the chart, on the app.
Mm.
That is our, our right. We just give away. We don't really go through it. But I think as technology develop and also more open source that we can apply. For example, now we can easily go to NASA's website to calculate comets ephemeris as long as we know how to read it. And that is what I really want to share in this book to tell our, comet tracer, comet amateur, going to find out comets ephemeris and working on it, and then calculate and do our own interpretation or do our own study, because I mean, not many people did that before. I'm definitely not the first one, to be honest. There's a lot of astrology also working on it, but it's quite kind of interesting. More and more people would be interested in comets, so it's nice. We get tool now. We get tools, so we can start to work on it.
Yeah, and I'm sure there'll be even more tools, but now it's actually, you're right. It's actually, we have the ability now to study these things and calculate them. So now it's time to do the hard work, which is to go back and study what they coincided with in history in terms of different events. And that's a large part of what you try to tackle in this book, is you identify some major comets at different points in history and you try to see what was going on in the world at that time, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think as a, I really love mundane astrology, so I think that is how usually we going to study when we notice like a major movement of the outer planet during the in the history, and we want to go back to see what happened during that time, or even like a Jupiter Saturn conjunction through different signs, through different element. So I say maybe I use this method, go through the comet and see what I can get, and was really surprised. I mean, or I shouldn't say surprised. Well, it's there. The old evidence is there, and we just have to, dig them out and. To find the relation between the historical comet, like the famous one, 1066. We know it's a legend. The Halley's Comet 1066 is a legend for the Halley's Comet related to the the Battle of Hastings and then William the Conqueror, taking over the England. And but apart from that, there's only few, only few comet has been write it down like that. So I mean, but that I think also um, other astrologer, for example, William Lillis, he did write the comments about his write his forecasting of a comet in I think what 16 something. I try to remember.
Mm.
I think it's a 1670 something, and that was very interesting. When I read that book, I was like, oh my god, it is right there in front of us, but why I never go to read it?
Right, just in terms of these records of different comets that did show up at important turning points in history, but it's just like, yeah, you've got to do the work to go back and actually research what was going on in history at that point to understand the context of
Hmm.
events that may have been important. And one of the things that you focus on in the book and is a useful filtering mechanism is that there are comets that astronomers classify as great comets, and this categorization is a little bit nebulous because there's like a bunch of different factors that go into whether something's classified as a great comet or not. But there are at least this notion that over the centuries that there have been some comets that are much more big and like spectacular and visibly striking than other comets. And so that can be a useful starting point for going back and studying what they mean in astrology, is just identifying some of the top comets in history.
Yes, great comet would be a very interesting topic to talk about it because there are not many. But I think Harley can take a few, like a 4 5 time, more than 4 5 time. In the record, Harley's comet always being categorized as a great comet, and but it is very interesting, like you say, the the nowadays the recent time how we define a great comet. Um, I have an idea. I have an idea is about why we don't really see great comet now. One thing, light pollution.
Mm.
And I think one about this light pollution, since we bright up the sky, when we see the comet, we barely notice it. For example, I think in 2020, a comet called Comet Neowise has been classified as a great comet. But when I went to see this comet in London, in central London, it's just like a tiny hair, just like a tiny hair with my naked eye, and I was saying, is that a great comment? Which is like I have I think many people like me, we will have imagination. Great comment should be like huge bright things hang up the sky and bright up the sky and say, oh my god, that is a comet. But I think maybe we we should what should I say? Maybe it's our imagination, trick us, but also the media like to say, comet of century. But I think last year when I see this so-called great comet in 2024, the Chichingshan Atlas, it does gain his name because I was so lucky because I was in the Canary Island, and that was really nice area for the stargazing. So the star was so dark, and then comet was really hanging there and bright as a really big and a beautiful tail, long tail. I think if you see my book, the cover of that book is the I took that photo. I took that photo of the Zhisingsan Atlas. That was exactly what I saw it, and that can I say yes. That if that is we call the Great Comet, then we probably have to understand why astronomer call it Great Comet. For example, there's another one. My while we editing my book, the editor remind me, said, "Do you know there is another comet called the Great Comet of 2025?" I was like, "Oh, really? I heard about there is. I know there is a comet in the early 2025 called Atlas. Again, the same name. But astronomers call it Great Comet because when it was close to the sun, it was so bright, but it was too close to the sun and only appear in the south hemisphere. So for us, we couldn't see it. Maybe only for the astronomer in the south hemisphere, they will notice. They know there is a comet coming up, and they prepare. They can see it. but most of us, and it probably only appear in the day just before sunrise, maybe for a couple minutes, and that's it. But for them,
Mm.
they categorize it as a great comet.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I always remember Comet Neowise from 2020 because it was discovered in March of 2020, which was like right when the pandemic and the lockdowns were hitting. And then
Yeah.
it became visible over the course of the next few months when we were still in the very, very early stages of all of that and everything that was happening in 2020. So it was kind of crazy. So did you say so you took the image that's on the cover of your book?
Not the linear ways. This you mean this one?
Here, I'll share it. Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
This one?
yeah, please. Yeah, this one is Zhishan Atlas, the one
Okay.
last year. The one last year. Yes, Zhishan
From
Atlas.
October of 2024.
Yeah, yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, nice. I love that. Yeah, so that's a good picture, but it raises the point where, sometimes there's just like crazy comets like Hale-Bopp was in 1996 or 1997 that are just visually spectacular. But a lot of the times comets can just be smaller and just something where you can barely notice the tail, but nonetheless there's something going on there. And in modern times, we're losing our ability to see it as much because of light pollution. But
Hmm.
sometimes if you go out to like the country or something like that, it can be much more visually striking.
Yeah, that's just my guess because I don't know how the ancient astronomer or ancient astrologer, classify the great comet. Maybe they are really like, maybe some of comet could be as bright as Hale-Bopp. I think that would be amazing. But I think another chance we're going to see the similar comet like a Hale-Bopp, probably very rare to be honest.
Yeah, it's extremely rare to see something like that. Like, it's hard to put numbers on it, but it's like, not insignificant comets or comets that are less in magnitude, less visually appealing happen semi-frequently. Like you'll get like one, maybe two a year occasionally, or every 2 to 3 years you'll get a little one. But it's like the more striking ones are like once a decade or 15 years or 20 years or something like that.
Yes. So when I prepare my book, I was really expecting to see a great comet. So I went through the history record, the recent one, the recent history record, and to
Hmm.
see when was the last time a striking great comet appeared in the sky, and the one I can find was back to 2007 comet Magno. That was the huge one, but only can be seen around the south hemisphere, and it has a very beautiful tail. And that was the one so-called maybe in what do I say? What should I say? Maybe it would be the one fit our description of the super great comet. It's like a striking view, and people would be wow with that kind of a amazing, amazing appeal. Look, yes, the tail is like a fan. Have you seen it? It's a
Yeah.
very, very beautiful. It's a magnet. This one is really beautiful. So I think the if we look at the photo and the photo I took about the 2024, I think the
Hmm.
2024 still least bright than this comet Magnum. And so I think you are right. Most astronomer will say, yeah, you can probably expecting maybe like 7 or 10 or 20 years to see a great comet like that. But was quite interesting because since I published this book and I feel like I really want to tidy up, prepare some information for our for our colleagues. So I want to find a record of the visible comet. Doesn't need to be great comet, but as long as a visible, and I can put on the record. So I went through the this book, this serious book called uh, Cometography
Oh yeah,
from
that's a
Colin,
great book.
a great book, whole series of 6 volume, really, really detail all the comet you can see from the history. And I think the recent one, last week I was in kind of not really working, so I start to prepare. I scan every page for the volume 5, I think, from 1983 to 1993. And the 800 page, I scanned one by one. Guess how many comet I found?
Mm.
Only nearly around 12. I maybe missed one or two, but as I know, maybe only 12 visible comet during that 10 year. And
Wow.
most of them are maybe like magnitude 5, magnitude 6. You know, there is like a barely see it, barely see it. And during that 10 years, probably apart from, I mean, 83 to, yeah, 83 to the 1993. So probably only one Halley's comet could be considered as a great comet, but still, we know that year not many people see it. So so we can say safely that 10 years we didn't see any great comet.
Yeah, that's been kind of a bummer that we haven't had any more spectacular ones for quite a while. So let me share an image of Hale-Bopp just from Wikipedia. So this is Comet Hale-Bopp, and this is a long period comet, but it was
Yeah,
pretty visually striking in the 1990s.
yeah.
Um, Here's an image from 1997 of just like how it appeared um, in the sky with its big tail. And then
Mm,
we've got like Halley's Comet over here. Here's a picture from 1986.
hmm.
Um, yeah, so they show up every once in a while, and then we get an opportunity to look at them. And I'm trying to think. One of the things about that I learned. Oh yeah, actually, have you ever read the text? It's one I'm very fascinated by, and I hope somebody translates it at some point. But it's called like the Book of Silk, and it was this text from China that was found from like the second century BCE, and it has illustrations and a whole typology of different types of comets, um, and I haven't seen a lot about this text, but I have seen some images. There's like some images out there on like Wikipedia and other places like that where it actually has drawings of like what the different types of tails look like, as well as potentially some different astrological interpretations. Um, yeah, but that would be something interesting to study at some point. And one of the reasons I'm interested in it is it seemed like there was a recurring theme in Chinese astrology of calling them broom stars, and sometimes the notion that they would like sweep away the old government at that point, or that there was something that needed to be cleaned up about the government. And sometimes the rulers at the time would make active changes in the government if they saw a comet that they thought meant was indicating that something wasn't going right and they needed to do better or something like that.
Yeah, I think that go back to the name of the comet in Chinese called Huixing. Most of the Chinese people will understand as the stars of wisdom, star of wisdom. This is today's name. But in the ancient Chinese, it doesn't write like that way. It write like brooms. It write like brooms. So
Mm.
it was like the tail of the comet is like a broom to wipe out things, try to cleansing, try to wipe out the dust. So that was the original idea of in the Chinese name of the Huixing with a broom star. But should be I should say, well, that is because those comet with tail. Now we know some comet they as too tiny, like those comet still can be visible, but they are very tiny, and they appear in the sky just like another planet, a weird planet moving around somewhere else, but not on the ecliptic. So Chinese astrologer call them either guest star, 克星, a star of a guest. Because it's just a guest, it will pass and it will never come back. Or some will call them like either evil star or monster stars. So they are they at least like three or four, five different names in the Chinese ancient record can refer back to comet. But these broom star are definitely very clearly with the shape of a broom with the comet's tail. And one thing is very interesting about the 1066 Halley's comet, because I just like oh, I know everyone know about Battle of Hastings and in the English literature some history record. So I say I was wondering, and I really want to know what happened in China at that time. And we have the record, so I went back to historical record to to do a little bit study. But very interesting. Yes, the detail was really like a record was very well detailed in the historical record about how emperor react when the astronomer report there is a comet appear in the sky. And the emperor's first reaction is, oh my God, I probably did something bad. I probably did something bad. So he decided to first fasting. He decided fasting and also kind of have some ask for all the minister to working harder and be careful, try to find out what's wrong, what we did wrong to have this this sign in the sky. And he even like asked the great historian to fix the his to kind of what I shouldn't say fix, to starting to do research of a historical record, trying to work on what is good emperor and what should I do. And it was very interesting. He really cared about the sign of a comet appear in the sky 1066. Unfortunately, he also passed away that year. Very next year, he passed away. So that kind of
Wow.
the rumors of the comet take the king away was kind of a that year, because we know that's not he's not the only one. I think we have the Harold II in England, and also Harold III in Norwegian. They both died around that time, and also this Song Yingzhong in China. He died I think in 1067 in January.
Oh wow. Okay. Um, yeah, and there's so many instances like that, and I know there was another instance like that in China in 1881, where the emperor. I was reading one article where it says the emperor issued a decree asking ministers to aid one another in maintaining an attitude of reverential watchfulness and to cultivate a spirit of virtue and examine their shortcomings. And I thought that was really interesting that there was like this moral component that would sometimes come up in Chinese astrology when they were viewing comets or when a comet showed up. And I sort of reflected that it was almost as if centuries of them developing the idea that broom stars sweep away politicians or governments meant that when one appeared that you should be extra cautious so as to not
Mm-hmm.
bring about your own downfall politically, or at least that's kind of my inference there.
I agree with you. Yes, I think that the same spirit, I think they would be really cautious with this kind of strange phenomenon in the sky, and especially comet would be one is unpredictable and unusual. So they be super cautious when it appear in the sky.
And there was in more recent times, a century ago, a famous example of that where there's like one or two or three comets that appeared around 1911 and 1912, and that was the end of the Chinese dynasty and the beginning of the Chinese Revolution, right?
Here we talking about the 1910 two comet.
1910.
One is Halley's comet, and one is called Great Daylight Comet 1910.
Mm.
One appear, I think, a Great Daylight Comet appear in January, and the Halley's appear a little bit later, around, if I remember correctly, around April, May. Maybe I'm wrong. But the two comet, one after another. One is like during that time, not only China, I think in the Western world, we start to believe that the comet can bring the toxic gas, and a lot of people prepare like an anti-comet hat, anti-comet pill. And then in China, yes, that does related to what we believe the modern revolution of a new China coming up, leading by the revolutionary like Dr. Sun Yat-sen, who was considered as the father of the modern China. Modern China. So he was leading the revolution. I think the big there is a lot. I think the revolution was begin even before 2010, but the most important year it was 2011, one after another revolution, one after another. Eventually, I think the Puyi was, I think, removed from his throne around 1912.
Okay.
Yes.
And that was the end of like the last imperial dynasty in China that had started way back. Well, that dynasty started way back in the like the 1600s, I think, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so sometimes, can coincide with really major events, and that seems to sort of fulfill some of the traditional interpretations of comets to a certain extent in China. So it's interesting that it culminated with that, and then um, yeah, the one we keep talking about from last year, from October of 2024, Tunshan Atlas, and how I noted how that coincided with the US presidential election and just the massive changes that are now taking place over the course of the past several months here as a result of that, seems relevant to some extent as well, even though that comet wasn't necessarily like a great comet in the sense of, Hale-Bopp
Mm.
or Halley's Comet or something like that.
Yeah, I think these 2000 this comet in two comet I should say two comet in 2024, and it
Right.
does have something, some kind of from if we look at from the mundane astrology view, it's very unusual. It's very unusual, and like what we're talking about the 1910. Two comet, two bright comet. That was a super bright. Unlike we talking about 2024, but when you say this with the U.S. presidential election, it is really, we need astrology, we need to pay a lot of time to go to study. And I think what I did, because I was work with my book, so I don't really working on intensively, but that when it compare with Joe Biden's chart, Kamala Harris chart, and Trump's chart, it look pretty interesting. I don't know how you do that work. I'm so curious now. I'm so curious about your research with this comet with the presidential election, because I didn't really put all my force on it, but it does related to what happened from last year to this year.
Yeah, so let's talk about that and some of the ways that astrologers interpreted comets or tried to approach it. So we've talked about how, I mean, one of the things we should say is that comets were viewed as omens in a type of astrology when astrology was still tied in with divination.
Hmm.
And in divination, the appearance of something from the perspective of the observer is what really matters. So it's not necessarily that like a comet shows up and it's causing things to happen, but instead the comet is acting as like a sign or an omen of something important that's happening in the world that's almost like being announced at that time. And actually I think that's why after I got into comets over the past couple of years, it made me go back and look at some material I'd worked on years ago on the Star of Bethlehem, and I actually strongly suspect that that's what they were trying to describe in the Christian, Bible with the birth of Jesus, is they may have been trying to describe a comet. And there's debates over whether there was a comet that was in that time frame that would have
Hmm.
fit, but it may have even just been like a literary device because of this notion of it like moving and announcing something. So comets as ominous phenomenon, but part of being ominous phenomenon is you need to pay attention to how it appears, what its color is, what the shape of the tail is, and if it creates any sort of like pattern or shape. Um, what are some other factors I know that you pointed out that astrologers were using later in the tradition as they were paying attention to casting a chart for the discovery or the visibility, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think this is from that more likely discovery chart. One of it is discovery chart, but from the record of Tycho Brahe, I think he was focused on the citizenship about the lunation, new moon and the full moon, and I think. I probably is here from your podcast to discuss why ancient astrologer are very focused on the citizenship because of the timing. Because of one of the reasons could be the timing, because they really couldn't find the exact time of certain ingress or something. So the new moon or full moon time could be one of the key, and that would be interesting. Explain why he used the new moon chart of the comet in the 1568, if I'm right. Yeah, 1586. Sorry, 1586, and he used the new moon chart. And also interesting, he also cast the when comet crossed the ecliptic. I was like, why? And that is
Right.
interesting. But also he did, because he write it down the time when he first see the comet. He write down the time and cast the chart. So I think this is show us how he worked, comet in the chart, and that inspire us. Maybe how could we started the comet with the discovery chart? Or I haven't really paid a lot of attention on a discovery chart, because nowadays, one thing, nowadays we have discovery time precisely. You can even, if you know how to read those record, you can even get hours and minutes and the place.
Mm.
But the problem is how we identify comets. The way we identify comets are so different. The ancient astrologer, they look with their naked eye. But the scientists nowadays, they discover with telescope, while comet is far, 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 far away, when they still have no light. So I was like, which way should we go? Maybe if I can identify, sometimes there's a report, the first naked eye observation with the date or time, then we can draw the chart. That would be very interesting. But if we draw, I think, well, because the most astronomer, they use a telescope, we can still draw the chart. I think it still means something. I don't know how you see that, because you are more familiar with traditional way, especially with the visibility of the planet and stars. I don't know how you see that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think both are relevant, both the discovery date of the comet and then probably the first visibility of the comet, as well as subsequent things like when it crosses the ecliptic. And because when it crosses the ecliptic, that's when it can cross the path of other planets. And I know in some of the ancient texts, they would interpret a comet differently based on if it crosses over any planets when it's visible. So, for example, if it crosses Mars or Saturn, that would be interpreted negatively, versus if it was crossing Jupiter, then some instances they would interpret that positively. But the first discovery chart is probably still relevant because it makes me think of, I did an episode recently that just released today, actually. We're recording this on August 3rd, 2025, with Philip Graves, and we were talking about how astrologers first started trying to understand the meaning of Uranus empirically once it had been discovered, and that it was interesting that it was discovered in the sign of Gemini, which it's just come back to, over the past month,
Yeah.
and something that happened in the past month. Right after Uranus went into Gemini, about a week later, there was a news report that astronomers had discovered something new about Uranus, that it was emitting heat, and like more heat from its core than they expected based on previous instruments or previous scans, so that it was raising some additional questions about Uranus that maybe required them to send further probes to it, other things like that. And I thought there was something significant about that then, that Uranus had just returned back to the sign of its discovery, and somehow there was something related to it that was coming up in the news. So to me, that sort of further confirmed that there might be something to first discovery charts when humanity first becomes aware of a celestial body that continues to be active and relevant with respect to that in some way.
Yeah, amazing. I totally agree and I love what you say. How could we not love astrology about this when we use even we say the discovery chart and this discovery chart probably using telescope rather than with naked eye, but it does count. And then when it's returned to the discovery position, it has something to do with it. And that's fascinating. I love like this kind of a moment, there's a goosebump can, getting up and then you can hear, when you hear this kind of news, I say, how could you not love astrology? It's amazing. I like this kind of thing. But also, I think the with the comet, one thing you mentioned earlier about the when comet course the ecliptic, and also when comet course the with planet. And let me give you an example. I also put it in the book, but not in the mundane section. And that was a kind of a, I mean, side product for my when I study the because my editor and publisher say, could you mention a little bit more about the comet with natal chart? So I went back to do more study, more homework come out. And while I was studying Agatha Christie, she was a legend, and she lived through the First World War and Second World War. So I was studying her life during the First World War, and I realized one thing. Let me share this interesting with you. The first was in the 1940, just before the First World War started, there were three comets can be seen in the sky. There were three comets.
Mm.
None of them are great comets, but they all have to record about naked eye observation during that time. And then there is a comet called Comet Devlin, Delavan, Comet Devlin. Sorry, Comet Delavan, which can be seen around July to September. And I think it was a line, it was kind of across Saturn, a line with the Saturn at 20, late of a late degree of a Gemini, and very soon was also past the 0 degree Cancer. Most modern astrologer call it the world axis,
Mm.
and that kind of alignment was kind of a during the just beginning of the First World War, that was kind of something. And the first comet was a comet Zotinsky was in May, and the second one is Delavan is start from July, and the right before was right before the First World War start, and the third one, comet Campbell, was from September. Three visible comet at that year. That was kind of
Wow.
wow.
Yeah, that's really impressive. And so that was the year that World War One broke out.
Yes, and also I think the comet crossed the Saturn, and that, like you say, that usually, if I remember, I should go back to my database to double check, because when I studied the three comet, I think it's not only once they have kind of three of them, maybe two of them, either both cross the 0 degree Cancer, and also uh, could we say conjunct or align with Saturn. I think
Mm.
at least two of them, at least two combat did happen in this situation. I was like, wow, you know.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's impressive. Um, so, and you mentioned studying it with Agatha Christie, and that brings up a point, a question about, sometimes there's famous instances, like we've said about famous people dying or world leaders dying around the time of a comet. And like the most famous, for example, is like Julius Caesar, who
Mm-hmm.
a comet appeared after he died during his funeral, and his adopted nephew, who became Augustus, used it to for political purposes, basically to say
Yes.
this was Caesar and he was being deified, and therefore by extension making Augustus the adopted son of a deified god. So he sort of like leveraged it for his own purposes. But it was interesting nonetheless that a comet appeared during the funeral of Caesar as a notable example.
Yes, I think he's not the only one, but he's a super famous one. I think this what should I say? This story also make comet into a very important position in Roman society.
Mm,
I think Pliny the Elder says that in Rome we have a temple dedicated to comets, and
right.
that was because of the same reason, and that was so interesting. Caesar is the one, and while I was doing my study, there are few famous people are kind of related to comet. Well, for people living in England, but I can say Princess Diana. I think the year she was born, there was a comet, and then the year she passed away, Hell Pop was there. And then another one is very interesting is the previous Filipino politician Fernando Marcos, and he was get his presidential position, get his power when comet was appear in the sky, and then I think he was removed from his position when Halley's comet appeared in 1986. So that was an interesting coincidence too. Another one, most recent one. Let's talk about Pope Francis, because the year he became Pope was the 2013, when the comet Prince Charles appeared in the sky, and the day was the day when comet crossed the ecliptic from south to north. I always remember um, one of our dear colleague from Texas mentioned that when I was giving a talk, and then she said, "You do you know that was the day comet moved from south to north, and the first pop we have a first pop from south hemisphere." I was like, "Oh my God! Thank you for sharing this." But we
Interesting.
remember, and we know he passed away early this year, and
That
last
was
year we have two,
Pope Francis.
yeah, Pope Francis, and
Okay.
comet. One comet appeared when he was being elected as a pope, and the one comet when he was passed away. So that I don't know how to say, but this kind of a study just make you say, wow.
Yeah, another really famous one that I love is Mark Twain, who he has this famous quote where he said, I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835. It's coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it. And he did end up like dying within that year. So he was born when Halley's Comet appeared, and he
Yeah.
died when Halley's Comet appeared. And that then ties in where, it may not just be sometimes like the death of like a famous person or a world leader or something like that, but also sometimes the potential for a comet to appear when a significant figure is born as well.
Yes, I agree. This is kind of a legend, or what we know about the comet, usually related to the disease of the famous people, politician, or leader. But not only leader, I think a lot of our famous people are probably more or less related to or equal to this comet's calling. But it's quite interesting. Is like who is more sensitive to comet? And that is kind of interesting idea in astrology. I heard about. Uh, Forgive me if I can't remember the name. Jonathan Flynn, an astrologer in the United States. I think he was the one who inspired me. Say, because I read his article, he was study comet, and then through my friend Mark Cullen, he introduced me his article, and he was talking about uh, people who were born in the year has a comet are more sensitive to comet. I was like, I wasn't sure because there's never has the any study on it. So
Mm.
maybe that would be my next project. Really do a serious study. I try to prove not because I would like to say everyone can apply comet's energy. Just a little bit liberal idea. But it could be, it could be. But I think we need more more study on this idea. Who is more sensitive to comment? But definitely famous people, because I think from the psychological astrology view, the disease of the famous people are really awakening us in the society, make everyone to face this fundamental issue of life, that one day we will gone. and especially with the famous people, country leader, super famous people, we are more kind of striking by it. We're like, oh my God, they can die, and how about me? So
Mm.
in that way, I think that could be the one significant of a comet would be like a collective grief or collective, awakening.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but that makes sense that maybe there's something symbolically to the comet appears and it's this bright, magnificent thing that everyone looks at, but then it disappears and goes away and almost like symbolically dies, almost like you're lighting a match that suddenly becomes very bright and visible, but then the match goes out and the fire is sort of like snuffed out, and maybe in some ways that's almost like tied in with some of the ancient beliefs like in Plato that each person's soul is like assigned to a star in some way.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yes, I agree with you. With this beautiful image, it would really remind us our life on Earth is limited and we can live forever. And then through those famous people, it kind of awakening because they think, oh my God, especially I think with the Theseus story. And then after there would be the kind of like 1066 and one after another. Most famous king or emperor are usually kind of afraid when comet appear. So it building up, I think.
Yeah, one of the ones I always remember was very early in my astrological studies, only like 5 or 6 years into it. Saddam Hussein died, I think, around the time that Comet McNaught, that we were talking about earlier and showed images of, appeared and was very bright and then disappeared. And I think there's even a famous like Shakespeare quote about that where Shakespeare in the play The Tragedy of Julius Caesar, he says, "When beggars die, there are no comets seen. The heavens themselves blaze forth the death of princes." So already in Caesar, like there's this notion of like comets being associated with prominent people, and especially, um, yeah, the death of prominent people.
Yeah, I think I don't know is that true or not, but I think looks like true because when we study comet, we usually notice that, right? Um, um, why I say I'm not sure, just because we need really more study on it. We really have to go to dive into comics record and go through it. But apparently at this moment, the very little comet, little numbers of comet I study, it does appear it sounds like it's true that with the famous people are usually more tied with the a comet, their death, and the important event in their life. So yeah, and that was very interesting with this Shakespeare's quotation about this the beggars that when beggar died, there's no comet, but when prince died, there's comet there.
Sure, yeah, and I'm sure there's much more nuanced approach to comets and different things that comets can indicate, or different ways that they can show up in like society or culture or art or sciences or other things like that, in the same way that other planetary cycles and things can apply to many different levels of things in society, or even eclipses, which are traditionally associated and still sometimes coincide with the death of prominent people. Eclipses can also indicate other important turning points in human history as well for different positive or negative reasons. And this is still, for both of us, for you and I, very early stages of research, but that we're trying to set like a new foundation that other studies can be based on in terms of what a fascinating area comets is and how much work there is to do in order to really develop this more in the field of astrology.
Yes, it is fascinating because the one thing, as we mentioned earlier, because lack of a resource that many of astrologers are not familiar with comets ephemeris and going to work with comet. And now we know there's a resource, there's a website, and we can use, we can apply. I really want to see more, our dear colleague to join us to discuss because comet is one thing. A comet is one of the wonder in the astrology, to be honest, because for us it's so new. For us, it's so new. Well, for the ancient astrologer, they spend time to seriously study it, and let's do our, our version too. But I think their observation, their study will definitely offer us to a starting point like a Lily study, like a Tycho Brahe study, or even ancient in the Arabic studies. All those ideas how we study comet, they offer us. For example, like when we see the comet with color, and when we discuss the comet's color, um, we use the ancient astrology view. What color is like a like a reddish, blood reddish, would be on Mars, and that would be a Mars nature with this comet. I think it was in the field record, it does related to plague or something. What's very interesting, we have to go to study it, and we have to go to see it. One thing I put in my book about the for our dear colleague, if we go to observe the comet, if you only see it from media, the photo from the media was edited, photoshopped, so you really not able to see the true color of that comet, because saturation, more brightness, you will turn comet to the same. And also another problem is with the pixel of a camera, the color camera. I usually turn the celestial object to green first, and if the photographer did not calibrate the photo you see, the comet will be green all the time. Will be green
Mm.
all the time. And so this is one thing we have to notice. So when we want to judge comet by its color, we have to go to see it with our own eye rather than see it from the picture. This is one thing we have to know. And also, like, quite interesting, the comet's shape. It was so new for me because I was just like, I think when I see this comet in 2024, and I keep asking myself, what does it look like? What does it look like? Is that it doesn't look like a round comet, but it does look like a pen, a laser beam, or something. I just keep asking myself, say, what would ancient astrologer categorized this comet? What
Mhm.
it, what they would name it, and I was just like, that is so interesting. There's so many things we learn from the ancient texts, and we can really also develop our own interpretation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also encourages you, watching the one last October, really encouraged me to get more into observational astronomy, and that, and then also the recent Mars Regulus conjunction that happened in June of this year was really beautiful and brilliant. And in addition to like some of the events that it coincided with, which are not as beautiful or brilliant, but the point is that there's a good reason to start going outside and looking at the sky again as astrologers, and take it from not just looking at the two-dimensional chart, but going out and starting to get used to how to identify where the planets are in the sky each night, or which ones are visible, or how to identify like when a planet's a morning star versus an evening star, and how to identify when the moon or other planets are crossing by a certain fixed star, and like knowing what fixed star that is, because all of that becomes very, very useful when a comet shows up. And then all of a sudden you can be able to identify it by knowing that, it should come out in the morning when all the other morning stars come out just before sunrise, or maybe it comes out as an evening star at just after sunset or something like that, or knowing that it's supposed to cross over a certain planet or fixed star. All of that can be very useful for being able to get that visual identification of it, which would then be used to interpret it symbolically.
100% agree with you. 100% agree with you. I love the stargazing, and like you say, with it's not only, I think one thing very directly, you gain the knowledge about why the ancient astrologer says these. Like, for example, correct me if I make a mistake. Likely, like Venus and Mercury would be more strong when it's occidental, and that because they are evening stars or something. And with all this, when you are visualizing it, the Mercury and the Venus, especially Venus in the evening star, is super bright, super beautiful. And then there's different way when it's rising before the sun is totally different. So when we going out to do the stargazing, it's not just fun. We can really directly to reflect those what we learn in the book, and that was really priceless. But also, it will kind of a we have kind of direct dialogue with cosmos. Let me put it in this more interesting and spiritual, or maybe symbolic way. We, no matter is that star we know it or not, or the constellation we identify or not, does that constellation appear in our chart? For example, Orion in the winter time, Orion is not in our chart, but we will have that Betelgeuse or Bellatrix, the fixed stars. Them, but when you see them, you have a dialogue with them, and that is kind of a priceless moment. I think I really, like you say, I really encourage all our colleagues go to see the stars. Just learn the sky, because it's our textbook too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you have mentioned earlier one of the things you've gotten into is um, astral photography and taking pictures of the sky, which is its own sort of like subdiscipline that you've got to learn and you can learn different things to become better at, right?
Yes, I think before, I mean, maybe let me say 5 years before, if you want to do the astrophotography, you have to spend a lot of money. But
Mhm.
now with the technology, I think with a little bit money, a couple $100, you can get a very nice so-called electric digital telescope that can really help you to see the planet and the beautiful nebula and the clusters. But also, you can do it with your smartphone. Going out to if you know how to operate your smartphone, sometimes you can take a beautiful Milky Way, and when you have that photo, you will start to thinking about what does that mean. Like for example, when we see the Milky Way, we see in one way before the Milky Way that would be the Antares and the Scorpio, the beautiful Scorpio. Then let me share with you like the first time I see the whole beautiful gigantic Scorpio constellation appear in Greece. It's just like a walk toward to me. I was like, now you understand why the ancient people are afraid about this constellation. It
Mm.
really coming to haunting you, coming to get you. And I was like, ouch, that is beautiful. That is beautiful. And then you soon I learned is right after that is Milky Way, and then after that is Sagittarius. That is kind of a interesting visualizing astrology in in our sky.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I love that. Well, yeah, and it really connects you back to the core of what a lot of the basic principles that we take for granted in astrology are all about is a lot of those techniques that we use that are thousands of years old at this point. A lot of them just go back to basic astronomical things about the visual component of what you can see that you might not get if you aren't looking at the sky yourself.
Yes, I agree. I agree. That really, well, at least for me, it helped me to understand. It helped me say, oh, okay, when you see it, you will not forget why the ancient people say this or that. So I think especially for traditional astrologer, if you went out to see the sky more often, you probably will, get more idea, or maybe just like, oh, maybe certain term or certain terminology could describe a celestial phenomenon about the moment, and then why they make that interpretation. I think that would be very, very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and getting back to that ability to interpret um, natural phenomenon as conveying symbolically significant information under the premise that the universe speaks to you or speaks to humanity at different points in time, especially at important junctures where there's an important turning point that's taking place for a lot of people. And that's probably important because even though we've focused and a lot of the ancient texts focus on like the, let's say, the death of major people or even the birth of major people, um, which can sometimes be like a singular event, a lot of the texts also refer to major events taking place that coincide with comets as well. And I think that's an important component, is that a comet showing up is not necessarily always going to be just like a singular event that it coincides with, but rather the unfolding of a sequence of events that impacts a lot of people. And so that can be one of the reasons why sometimes comets were associated also with like natural disasters and other things in the ancient world, because that can be something that impacts and changes the lives and the direction of large groups of people over, let's say, a period of time.
I agree with you. Like, for example, we talk about Aristotle when he talk about this comet in the 371 BC. Then he writing in his what we call the meteorology, about the related to earthquake, and then following by disaster one after another. Uh, Back to astrology, I think this type of event happen to ourselves. For example, an individual, if we facing this kind of a disaster, it would be life changing. It will be life changing for any one of us, and then it force us to live with it or to find the way, another way of life. So it totally change us. But I like to go back to the one of a mythology related to comet about I mean in the epic about the Trojan War, that which I mentioned in the book. Um, the Prince Aeneas during the Trojan War, he saw the comet as a sign, and his mother Venus was kind of tell him, say, in a dream, tell him, say, you should leave, take your father and leave Troy and go somewhere else, follow the comet. So somehow follow the comet. It could be also find a new way. Well, eventually the legends taking about he is another founder of the Rome. So it's kind of interesting to, the comet as a significant, in one way, is disaster, but in another way, help us to find a new way to survive, or, to living in another life.
Yeah, especially if there's like radical changes, like in the same way that eclipses can sometimes indicate radical changes, and that can be tumultuous. Sometimes those changes can like push you in a direction that you might not have gone otherwise, which in the long term can sometimes be productive. But I'm glad you mentioned the tails, because there were some ancient texts that talk about the tails or the directionality of the comet indicating the direction of the world that might be impacted. Like, for example, I found this passage from this book from the 12th century
Hmm.
called the Syriac Book of Medicines, and there was this article by Rudolph titled "The Great Star Falls," and one of the quotes was, it said, "quote, the star with the tail indicates famine and pestilence. The star with a spear indicates war and strife. The star with a beard indicates a change of government and its downfall. And know that in the quarter of the earth to which the tail of the star is directed, there will be anger, and that which is to be will be." So I thought that was really interesting in
Yeah.
terms of the potential for the symbolic directionality of the comet, perhaps indicating something like geographically in terms of places to watch out for and things like that.
Yes, I think the one thing is very important. Um, the the what should I say? During the ancient time, the ancient astrologer has this knowledge to interpret. They are the only person who can interpret the comet. So with comet's tail, where comet tail pointed, or what comet's tail looks like. Yes, with the comet's tail, what comet's tail looks like, and they use that shape of a comet to make a interpretation is very interesting, and I think we should learn a little bit more with it. For example, in the beginning, you mentioned about not every comet as a bad omen. Some comet, like for example, I think in the book they probably write like if comet look like another sun, that would be a good omen for the king and the great prince. So not all the comet is a terrible bad omen with disaster or death of a king. But also interesting is about the tail, where tail pointed to. But it's quite interesting. I mean, I make a joke, and forgive me for my ignorance. I always make a joke about that. Well, that's because the ancient time only few astrologer who can see the comet and then who can interpret the comet. But nowadays, in every continental, there will be an astrologer who dare to go to look at the comet, and with the comet pointed to west sky, comet tail pointed to west sky, saying that maybe saying their neighborhood country would be a problem. But if every country has this astrologer going to say that, it would make a change, and that is kind of a well. But I think we should still study it because at least not every country or every continental has astrologer or astronomer going to make that observation. I think it's important as astrologer going out to see the sky and look it and make its own interpretation, and that would be the important. So we can study, we can re-examine those ancient texts. But if we just like look at the chart, we probably miss the chance or we give it right away. And also, you mentioned something quite interesting about the quarter. The quarter. I think that is very interesting. That should be one of the study we dedicate more time on it.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and I think that's really worth emphasizing that while the vast majority of literature on comets is negative and views them as ominous and a source of major difficulties, that there were interpretations of comets as indicating positive things in some instances in the ancient world. So Hephaestus of Thebes, for example, talks about a comet that he associates with Jupiter because he has a list of comets that he associates with each of the planets, and the one associated with Jupiter actually is supposed to indicate some positive things. Or Varahimira has a very long list of comets from like the 7th century, written in Sanskrit in India, and different types of comets, and some of them do indicate positive things. Or I found this quote from a very early Christian author, like church father named Origen, and he's
Mhm.
talking about comets, and he lived, um, I think, around the third century. Let me double check that. Yeah, he lived in the third century, and this quote from Origen, he cites an earlier um, Egyptian Stoic astrologer named Charamon. And here's the quote, it's set from Origen. He says, "It has been observed that at great events and at the most important changes of earthly affairs, stars of this kind appear, which signify either changes of kingdoms or wars or whatever may happen among men, which can shake earthly affairs. And we have read in the book on comets by Charamon the Stoic how comets have sometimes appeared even when good events were about to happen, and he gives an account of these." So unfortunately, we don't have that book on comets that survived from Charamon the Stoic, who was from somewhere around, I think, the first century CE. But from this report, from this third century Christian author, we can hear that sometimes they did associate comets with positive things, even though the tendency was to interpret them negatively.
Yeah, and I think that is, like you say, unfortunately, we don't have that text. And most people just simply remember the easy remember thing, the death of a king. So we are easily to associate comet with bad omen. And I think that's why, that's another reason I start my my study. I really want to find out more about the comet, more about the comet. And unfortunately, when I started, I was working with like more like a modern astrology way and look at the chart and dig out more things. And the traditional astrology is really not my strength. But I try, I do my best. But thank you for mention those books. I mean, that would be so important for me to to go back and then to study more about their interpretation, because that would definitely mean something different when we again to see another comet and we are trying to make another interpretation about it. That would be really important for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad that you kind of set a nice foundation in your book because a large part of the second half of the book is going through some of the great comets and establishing some like time frames and some of the most important comets to study, as well as talking about some events that happened around those times. So it provides a really nice foundation that people can use in order to begin to investigate what comets mean in astrology.
Yes, well, but for me, it's still a working in progress, and I have to admit, this is very new. This study is very new, and to be honest, even until publish this book, I wasn't sure am I doing the right way to study. Because I was just like, I use the knowledge I have trying to exam, but I wouldn't dare to say I found the truth or something, but I just like it would be a good starting point, especially with the tool, with the knowledge, with my experience I have to examine comment in this way. But that means there is so many other ways. Like for example, I keep saying I'm not familiar with traditional technique. If we can really go to exam those comment, I really want to see one day we can examine those comet with the also with the traditional technique, and that would be fascinating. That would be really fascinating. But while I'm writing my book also, with limited of a page, like I couldn't really write every comet with their CCG. I really want to do that too. I really want to maybe spend some time to check their CCG, or check the compare the quarter of the comet. That would be so interesting to continue to study. But thank you for give me this chance to talk about this book, and then I really want to see more astrologer, more colleagues to share their idea about the comet.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad to have the opportunity just because, like I said, I'd been researching this for the past couple of years and kind of building it up too much to that I needed to do like a huge comprehensive episode on it that covered all of the history and the astronomy and the philosophy and answered what once and for all and went through a whole list of all of the great comets. But then I saw your book was coming out and I thought I would just take this opportunity to have this discussion to sort of like open this field up for people and to share some of our different thoughts and some of the different things that we've got so far. And then I'm excited to see, I'm hoping it gets integrated and maybe some websites like AstroSeek, for example. Peter from AstroSeek is very good at integrating new things. So maybe people could request that he integrates some Comet things into his website. And I'm sure this is going to be a field that will open up as an exciting new area of research in the coming years.
Oh,
Yes. Go ahead.
yeah, yeah, definitely. When you say you're going to do those things, I thought, wow, that would be so cool, because we know you would take when you are interested in one subject, you really go deep in it, and so we are really looking for. We are so lucky to have you, and so looking forward to see you, go through the comment. That was going to be fun and going to be very helpful for your audience, who into the astronomy and astrology. They're going to be fun to listen those podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, hopefully we can crowdsource it. Um, I had some help already with research by Vandana Gayan, and I'm sure other people, if they want to go back and identify some of the different great comets in history and research some of the events that coincided with them, then we can eventually pool those resources a little bit more in order to create something more comprehensive. But at this point, I'm really glad you wrote the book and created a new foundation for all of us in terms of starting to talk about this issue of comets and identifying some of the most important ones. So, yeah, congratulations on doing that and good work.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I'm so excited finally being here in astrology podcast.
Yeah, well, you definitely, writing such a book, it was a good job, and I'm glad we did this. So, what do you have coming up, or what are you working on? What's your website, and do you offer consultations and classes?
Yes, I do. I do offer the webinar, kind of a once a month. I will dedicate some time. I will do the more likely mundane astrology webinar, but sometime I would like to share some topic with beginners to share with like people who are just into
Kozalak,
astrology
what's up,
and
brother? How are you,
help them
man?
to get into astrology. So
How
also
are you,
I
my
do
brother?
some podcast on the
How you
YouTube.
doing, bro?
Is the channel is AOA UK1, and just like most likely
How are you, matey?
once a month I will have a mundane astrology
What's going
discussion
on, dude?
with astrologer in Europe.
Thanks, brother. How are you,
And
man?
also sometimes I will just talk about some transit and that's what I'm working. And mainly
We're in
my
China,
passion
brother.
is
We're back in
teaching
China.
student from Chinese
We're back
speaking
in
world, that's my
Changsha.
mother tongue. So I will be spend more time on it. But
We're
in English
teaching
one,
high
I
school
would rather do it
biology.
once a month. That's
I'm
what
already
I'm
fucking
doing
pretty
at this
pissed at
moment.
their
But
communist
also, like you
bullshit
said,
they're trying to pull.
this continuing study
They're
format
they want to
being
take
one
temperature.
of
They
the
take
things I'm
temperature of the children every day, and if they have a fever or some shit, they send them to quarantine.
scan the comment one by one.
Just some serious
try to
bullshit that I'm like
pinpoint the
against. I might quit my job because of it.
So we
I
will
can't
have
I
the
can't
link
stand
and
that
we
shit.
can start,
Fucking the
test
double
it.
standard. The
Once I have
teachers
the
not being
link
tested, but the kids being tested because they know that the teachers would never stand up for that bullshit. But I digress. How are you, man?
Okay, excellent. I will.
You still thinking about working in
put that
China?
description
There's
on YouTube or on the podcast.
I can't offer you any job, but they're saying that if I know anyone that wants to work in China and English native speaking, they really need to be native speaking. I'm sorry, they discriminate bigly.
Should be on 20
Got tough health-wise for a while? Oh no, I'm sorry, dude. I'm really sorry, man.
The worldwidely is the 20th of August.
It looks like in the US it might be released on August 13th.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a university degree
That's why I wasn't sure because
and a TEFL 120 hours,
Interesting. Yeah, well, that's
you
great.
can get it on TEFLhero.com
Fractional charts this
for like $100 or something.
Venus
US.
conjunction that's happening in Cancer.
And if you have a university degree, you can teach in China.
In the morning sky.
Let me know because I get referral money. I get money if I refer someone that comes and works in China. So if you're still thinking about working in China, bro,
for some people,
send me a message on Twitch.
or just share in
And again, they emphasize native English speaking. I'm not the one that hires.
Absolutely.
They like mass advertise the recruiters. You know how recruiters are. Recruiters are like bullshit all the time about everything. You know what I mean?
Otherwise,
Recruiters are the biggest bullshitters in the world, but Chinese recruiters are a little less bullshitty.
Chris, thank you for having me.
I hope your health. I hope you're doing better, man. I hope your health is doing better, brother.
this episode of the Astrology Podcast. And
Thanks for nice comment. I'm actually just about to sign off, man.
if you're a fan of
Yeah, I know,
podcast,
dude.
to find a way to help support
I know, man.
research, then consider becoming
I know, brother. I'm sorry. My girlfriend also isn't. I tried.
Get access
I
to
sent her resume and all the shit to the schools
the ability to attend
here in China, but like
the monthly
they only want. I mean, I'm not saying they won't pick you,
podcast
but they wouldn't pick her because she's not native English speaking.
available to patrons, or you can even get
I'm sorry, man.
credits.
I know it's absurd. It's discrimination. Chinese people just are like the biggest discriminators. It's insane.
Thanks to patrons on my producers tier, including patrons Chris.
Do you have an accent though? If you don't have an accent,
Mandy Ray, Angelique.
maybe if you have an accent, I don't know.
Jeannie Marie Kaplan, Melissa.
We could try. We can always try. You know, we can always fucking try.
Annie Newman, Ginger Sodlier, Berlin West, and Nikki Crawford.
Stream is rewinding. Doing
People
better.
often ask me if I'm available for consultations, but
Hope I'm fine. Yeah, buddy. I'm fine, buddy.
takes up so much of
Yeah,
my
dude.
time.
We're trying to get by the Chinese firewall, so I hope stream is working. But yeah, I'm about to sign off though, my man.
You can find that at
I'm gonna do a final flex. I'm sorry, I know you just told me your health issues. I always flex every weightlifting stream for progress update, right? But
which is astrology software for the PC.
I'm glad you're back. I hope you're doing better, man. I might stream GoldenEye tonight, bro. I might do that like in a few hours. I got a fucking dude. Let me show you my setup. Let me show you my setup.
For Mac OS, which is astrology software for the Mac computer, made by the creators of SolarFire.
Oh yeah, baby. Look at this fucking
piece. Discount with the promo code AstroPodcast15 on their website at astrogold.io. If you're really looking to deepen your studies of astrology, signing up for my Hellenistic astrology course, which is an online course in ancient astrology, where I take people from basic concepts up through intermediate and advanced techniques for reading birth charts. There's over 100 hours of video lectures, plus monthly webinars and Q&A sessions, and then at the end of the course, you get a certificate of completion saying that you studied with me.
Yeah, bro, we bought
Find out more information.
like bench press. I bought the whole setup again here.
Finally, shout out to our sponsor for this episode, which is the United
China number one? No. China is not number one. China fucking sucks.
Chicago. Find more information at uacastrology.com.
CRT gang, yeah, buddy. Fucking sick. CRT was like the most expensive thing I bought here, like single item. I paid nearly $200 for it delivered. No, I paid like 160 Canadian dollars delivered. But it's fucking 32 inches. It's amazing. But everything else, like the bench press, the power tower, the dumbbells, the barbell weights, the parallel bars, everything was like 450 Canadian dollars, which is a steal. The same price. I'm lean, I'm a lot leaner. I'm much leaner. Feeling healthy and feeling good. I'm definitely way leaner, but I'm feeling good. But I'm going, man. I gotta go. I gotta sign off. I gotta sign off now, brother. But thank you, man. Thanks for being here, man. I gotta sign off. I don't think anyone else is online. It's like 6, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. See you later, bro. Yo, thanks for being here, man. Appreciate it, man. But yeah, message me on Twitch if you're thinking about working in China. Again, you gotta have your university degree and TEFL 120-hour degree. Okay. Bye-bye. See ya. Thank you, brother. Glad you're doing better, I hope. As you say. Maybe Golden Knight tonight. Maybe. Alright, no worries. All right. All right. See you later.